Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just about to show you how I make my face mask scarf. It's an idea I've seen on YouTube and Pinterest and what have you, and my daughter's requested one, so I'm going to have a go. Right, so what we need first of all is a pattern. I got this one from the internet and I'll put the link to it in the information below. So you cut that out in your outside fabric and you'll need a lining. So my outside fabric is this beautiful zebra print. Just be careful if you've got a directional print that they're going to go in the same way. This is the top, and so the zebras need to be standing upright. And I've also cut it out in a plain fabric to go with the outside. You need something that's different because you really need to know which side is next to your face all the time. So let's get on. The first thing I'm going to do is join the two fronts together down the centre. So I'm going to use a sewing clip just to start it off, and it's a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so and that's all the way through. So I'm going to sew that on my machine, which I've threaded up with black thread. Start it off, a little bit of a back stitch, and all the way to the end, making sure those edges are level. Just be careful because it is on a curve, so you just need to gently ease it round and try not to get any pleats or gathers in it. There we are, just a bit of a back stitch, and then that's that done. So there's that seam done, and I'm going to do exactly the same with the lining fabric. I always start from the bottom end because this end, because it's a point, my machine tends to chew it up as it starts. So there we go. Again, 1/4 inch seam allowance. Keeping that curve nice and steady. Mine's bunching up a little bit, so I've just rearranged the foot so that it doesn't make a pleat. And that's that done. And then the next thing to do is to press it so those seams are nice and flat. Even though it's on a curve, you'll still need to press that seam so it lays nice and flat. So I have a little mini iron to my side here. Just switched it on so it's not quite warm enough, but just make sure, get in there and just make sure that that seam is laying nice and flat. Turn it over because obviously this is going to be on the inside, so it really needs to go that way. So there's one, and now my main piece. You can snip the curve if you like, but I never have done, I have to say, and it seems to be okay. Right, so the next step is to join the front and the lining together. So right sides together. Always match the top and the bottom seam, and I usually have one seam allowance going one way and one the alternate way, so you don't get that bunching of fabric. Secure that with a clip. It's again, if you like to sort of tack or pin, then please do, but I'm happy enough just to use my sewing clips. So I'm going to do the top first of all, getting all those edges nicely matched up. That doesn't seem to fit, does it? Make sure I've got that at the top, and yes, it will do now. So just ease it round until it all nicely matches. So there we go. That's that clipped. Now I'm just going to sew that again with my 1/4 inch seam allowance. When you get to the point on the seam, it'd probably be better to pivot it on the seam rather than try and go all the way around in one go, and then off down the other side. And there's the top seam done. I'm going to do exactly the same with the bottom seam. Trim off those threads, and at the same time I'm just going to cut across there just to cut that excess off. And then exactly the same with the lower seam. Oh, in fact, we don't need to do this if we're going to put on the scarf. If you were just going to make an ordinary mask, then you would do that bottom seam, but that's going to get caught in with the scarf, so we don't need to do that. The only thing I need to do now is to put the elastics in, because we need to do that before we actually put it onto the scarf. So I cut my elastic 6.5 inches, so it's just black elastic like that, and I made 2 pieces 6.5 long. That's a pretty good size for an average woman, probably a bit longer for a man, a bit less for a child. So I'm going to fit my elastic in here, open that up a bit. So I'm going to pop that on that edge there, give it a clip. I'm going to move that down there. Just make sure that you don't go right to the edge, leave it probably a little bit more than 1/4 inch, because you're going to have a 1/4 inch seam allowance along here, or maybe even half. So I'm going to put mine there, clip it, and then bring those other sides back on top, tuck that piece of elastic in, redo your clips. And there we go, that's ready to sew. Apologies if you can hear snoring in the background, that's my cat sleeping on the bed behind me. And there you see, inside we have the elastic fitted. So we're going to do exactly the same on the other side. My other piece of elastic. Now I'm using 1/4 inch elastic, which is very comfortable to wear. I think any wider and you might find it's a little bit uncomfortable around your ears. Clip that. And then like the other side, make sure you don't twist your elastic. Make sure it goes all the way around nicely flat. And on the other side, about 1/2 inch from the bottom edge, because obviously that's going to be the seam for when we fix this mask onto the scarf. There we go. And sew that with 1/4 inch seam allowance. This particular design doesn't need to have a nose piece in it, because actually the design and the shape of this mask really doesn't mean you have to have one. It actually stays on your nose quite nicely. So we turn that the right sides out. You can do snip the corners off if you want, but it's quite light material, so it doesn't really need to. Make sure you push out the top of the nose piece. Yeah. And then just roll that seam in between your fingers so it's nice and flat. You know it's all pulled out. There we go. And I just need to give that a jolly good press. And then I'm going to top stitch it around the edge. So I'm just going to press this now. Both the top and the sides. Make it nice and crisp. If you can hear that funny little noise in the background, that's my Maine Coon girl talking to her kittens. So there we are, that's ready to be top stitched. So I'm going to take it to the machine and top stitch about 1/8 inch all the way around. I'm altering my stitch length to 2.8, which for me is a pretty good length for a top stitch. There we go, and all the way around the top edge. Again, when you come to this centre point, okay, just put your needle in and swivel it. And off we go again. This top stitching just keeps it all nice and flat. I need to go a little bit further that way. There we go. And there's my mask. Ready now to be fitted onto the scarf. So, we need a 25-inch square of your fabric. So here's my fabric. To be a bit further than that. Nope, need a bit more. Move my line out of the way. Nearly that. I should have cut this out beforehand, but there we go. Right, so that's 25 inches. Get all that smoothed out. So that length is 25. So what I'm going to do is fold that over there. So I know that this piece is going to be the 25-inch square. I'll just check that again before I start cutting. That's going to be 25 exactly, and so is that exactly. Brilliant stuff. So all I need to do now is cut this out. I'm starting from this end, I'm actually cutting the selvage off. It's beautiful fabric, this is. There we go. All the way down to that point there. That's it. I'm going to cut this fold here. Making a bit of a pig's ear of this, but anyhow, that's why I should have really done it first. So I'm going to cut this fold here. I don't know whether you can see what I'm doing, but you get the gist. I'm cutting out this square. So here we are, my square of fabric. It's beautiful fabric, isn't it? My daughter said she wanted zebra print. So this is zebras in zebra print. I love it. So now what you need to do is across the diagonal, because we're going to join these two pieces together, we need to cut along that diagonal, because this is where we're going to put our mask. So starting, in fact I could give it a press first, and that'll make the cutting line a bit more obvious. So I've got to press along there. There we go. You can also see that my square went a bit wonky, so I'll just tidy that up. These scissors are brilliant, by the way. They're Mill Shop online ones, and they're fantastic. So basically I need to cut along that diagonal. Just be careful that you don't stretch it too much, because it is on the bias. So there's that lovely line that I can use to cut my diagonal. There, that's done. So now I just need to put these two pieces right sides together, because this is going to be a double scarf piece. Like that. And so what I'll be doing is joining this piece all the way around and then bag it out. But I'm going to put my mask inside the seam here. So what I need to do is find the centre of this length, which I'm just going to do by folding it in half. And popping a pin. It's a bit wonky, that pin. I'll find another one. Okay. I'm putting a pin on the centre mark there. There we go. That's my centre. There. So now I need to put my mask in. So I'm going to put the bottom edge of my mask in, but because I want, let's see which side is going to be, right, this side I think is going to be the front. I want the front of my mask facing the front of the scarf. So I find my centre line here, which is the seam where the mask fronts meet, and that's going to go there where the centre point of my triangle is. So I'll bring that back. Get the centre point of this again. Could probably mark it with a marker, that would be easier, wouldn't it? And then I wouldn't lose it. And there's the centre point. Just folded it again and I put the centre point there. So now what I need to do is just ease that mask because it's got a slight bend on it. So ease that mask bottom along that seam and along that seam, and I'm going to use my sewing clips to put that in. There we go. So that's one side of the mask, and then we're going to ease the other side of the mask in. And you can see that I've got room to have at least a half-inch seam along there if I want, so it'll miss, so it'll miss the elastic. So there's a good half-inch. So just get these two edges together. So they're not going to come adrift as I sew. Get that elastic out of the way, you don't want that catching in the seam. And basically just clip all the way along. I don't necessarily have to put them, you know, very close to each other because I can do this adjusting as I'm sewing. But the top of this is quite stretchy because it's on the bias, so you just need to be a little bit more careful with it. Get that elastic out of the way, move out of the way, and then clip along to the end. Right, now I'm going to sew that first before I sew these edges, the other three edges. So I'm going to do probably about 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And I'm going to sew all the way along. I'm just going to actually turn my stitch length down a little bit to 2.6. And here we go. I'm just going to stitch all the way along. I'm actually doing 3/8 of an inch allowance. I just need to be careful when I get to where that elastic might be, because I don't want to catch that in my seam. You'll be able to feel when you come up to where you've got your mask in, and mine is just coming up here. I know my elastic's around here, so it's not going to catch in. Again, coming up to where the elastic might be. Don't want to catch it in, so just making sure it's well out of the way. And carry on sewing. Try not to pull this seam as you go, because it will have a tendency to stretch because it is a bias. Something under there that I don't want to get in. That's it. Now I'm going to take the opportunity, because that's an open, the scarf is open. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the opportunity to press this seam before I sew up the other sides. So I'm going to get my larger mat out. I can find it. There we go. These wool mats are fantastic. Make sure my iron's on. And I'm just going to press this seam so it's nice and flat. And there you see the mask nicely on it. And then carrying on pressing, I've got a nice crisp seam, because we are going to top stitch along there once we've sewn the other seams up. There we go. Turn that off. So now back to sewing. So I'm now going to sew the remaining seams, the 2 remaining seams together, remembering to leave a turning gap. So I'm going to put a turning gap there and there. There we go. That should be enough, about 5 to 6 inches, probably a bit less if you like. Make sure your points are together. And make sure that's going to go up to the point. Put the clip around the right way. And down the other side. Get that thread out of the way. And same, but I don't need to leave a turning gap down this edge. All I need to do is make sure that that's nice and flat. And then it really is just a case of stitching a straight seam again. I'm going to use a 3/8 of an inch seam up as well. But, you know, if you want to, you can use a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch. It really depends. That's up to you. So here we go. I'm going to start sewing from this side. In fact, no, I won't. I'll start sewing from my turning gap. And then I won't forget about it. So there's my turning gap. Again, a 3/8 of an inch seam. So I'm lining it up against my 3/8 of an inch seam allowance marker. And off we go. I'm going to do a few back stitches here though, because I want to reinforce that the end of the turning gap. Otherwise you might find it starts to come adrift. And while I'm here, I'm just going to snip off that. There's my point. I'm just going to snip that off. And because it's quite a sharp point, I'm going to make it into a sort of arrowhead. Right, I'll do the next bit. Again, 3/8 of an inch. This is such an easy make to do, and it really is a nice thing to wear, especially this time of year where you want a little bit of warmth around your neck, but you may be going somewhere where you need a mask and you don't have to faff about in your handbag. You don't have to faff about in your handbag trying to find a mask that you've probably forgotten. nicely there on your scarf. Side. I don't have to leave my turning bit on the side, but I do have to go and finish off the other bit. Down here. I think that's about it. Yeah, perfect. And then I'm just about ready to go down this edge, which would be my final piece. There's the clip for my turning gap. Again, some nice back stitches just to reinforce that opening, and snip off your threads. Snip off those while I'm at it. And so there's my scarf all sewn. I'm going to trim that point so it finishes off nicely when I turn it through. And I've got one more point to do, that one. Cut it across there and make it into an arrowhead. It just means there's less bulk of fabric when you turn it and you get a slightly pointier point. So now it remains to turn this thing through. There we go. So I'm getting up to the point as far as I can with my fingers, pushing it through. Go to the next one. Again, get as far in as you can with your fingers, and then the last one is the bottom point. Pull all that fabric through. There comes your mask. And really you just need to go in now with a pokey tool, or I've got a bamboo pointy thing, and just make sure that's a really nice point. Look at that. Perhaps a little bit more. Yeah, there we go. So there's one point. That was the bottom point, which is slightly easier. Get the one of these points out. This is where you're going to tie the scarf at the back of your neck and make that as pointy as you can without going through the fabric. Doesn't really matter, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect because nobody's really going to see it. And the last one, certainly getting as much fabric away as you can when you trim it definitely helps. That's what, see, that's a bit blunt, but not to worry. So that's that. It needs a good press now. Make sure that you press the opening as well when you do that, so that's nice and neat and tidy. And then we're going to top stitch all the way around, so I'm going to press all that all the way around. Put my iron on. Oh dear, one of the kittens isn't happy. And really, you just need to roll these edges between your fingers. You can sort of finger press as you go, which actually makes this then a little bit easier to do it when you come to iron it. There's my mask. It's the front of my mask. This was the seam that I already pressed, and that's an awful lot easier to roll between your fingers. And then along one of the sides. This definitely helps to finish the scarf off. And if you press it and you're happy with the way it looks just pressed, then by all means leave it like that, except what you'll have to do is hand stitch the turning gap. There we are. But because I'm going to top stitch it, means that I am able to close that turning gap in the top stitching, in with the top stitching. Nearly done. Just one more edge to go. In fact, I do love this material. I've got enough to make myself one, so thank you, daughter, for suggesting a zebra print. I really like this. I do have a lot of cats in the house, so all those funny noises you hear are different cats. Nearly done. Right, so I'm just going to give this a really good press with my iron. And then all that remains is to top stitch. It comes together really quickly, so it's a really quick make. I'm sure she's going to love this. Bit of an odd thread there, but I can cut that off in a minute. Right, so that's all that pressed, and so really all it needs now is to be top stitched. So I'm going to start where my opening is, which is there. And again, this is just 1/8 of an inch. Now I tend to start, no I don't, I tend to start with my needle down, and I do a couple of on the spot stitches, which my machine can do. I'm going to change my stitch length to 2.8, and I'm just going to go all the way along. Around the whole thing, even underneath the mask, because then it all just makes it sit together really nicely. Obviously, when you come to a point, pivot on your needle, and then off we go again. said before, if you don't want to do this top stitching, don't feel you have to, because it's just preferential, your own preference. I mean, I happen to quite like it. And see, that is going to need a bit of a push through there. Off we go. Because where that point is, there's quite a lot of fabric, and my machine isn't particularly good at starting off with hardly anything to material underneath it, so it's always a bit of a problem. So this is the top of my scarf where it meets the mask. So just when you get to your mask, just make sure that it's nicely down, and just carry on top stitching around. It's got a slight curve on it, so just be aware of that when you're stitching. Almost there. Right, this is another point where I know my machine isn't going to like it particularly, but I need to go a bit further. Bulky material and a point, so I've got my little pushy thing ready just in case. Yeah, and it doesn't want to go, so just give it a helping hand. Come on, that's it. And we're nearly back to the beginning, where I'm just going to go over the stitches that are there a couple of times, and then press my on the spot casting off thing, and that's it, we're done. So I'm just going to trim those threads carefully. Gosh, black thread is so difficult for me to see. I used to have fantastic eyesight, but as I've got older, unfortunately, that is one of the things that has gone. Right, so there is the mask attached to the scarf. Now, what I tend to do is just tie these two ends in a little knot. You can do this when you put it on, but I just find it's easier to do it before, and then you just have to pop it over your head. I probably should have had a little bit more in that. So now, moment of truth, over your head. Just adjust it. If I want the mask on, just put it over my face. There we go. Just adjust the scarf so it looks okay. So there's my mask with the scarf on. With the scarf on. It actually looks quite pretty. And then when I don't want to wear it, I just take it off and tuck it in and rearrange my scarf, and you wouldn't know. So, sorry about my hand. So there you go. I'm really happy about that. I hope you enjoyed watching. Thank you. Bye bye.